Hello and welcome everybody to the April 2025 Harbor Commission regular meeting. I'm Adam Stanok, Chair, and calling to order this meeting at 6:31 p.m. Mr. Lopez, could we please start with a roll call?
Yes, Commissioner Anderson, not yet present. Commissioner Cohen?
Here.
Commissioner Ford?
Here.
Commissioner McCray is absent tonight. Commissioner Nelson? Here. Commissioner Stedman?
Here.
Chair Stanwyck?
Here. Thank you. Director Wilshire, do we have any changes to the agenda this evening?
Nothing, Chair Stanwyck, thanks.
Great, thank you. Mr. Lopez, do we have any general public comment for this evening?
Chair Stanwyck, there are no hands raised and no speaker slips submitted.
Great, thank you. I also believe that we had no written public comment as well. With that, Vice Chair.
Thank you so much. I believe we have a couple of work group reports tonight, so I'll turn it over to Chair Stanwyck for a budget work group report.
Yes, thank you. Yeah, every year around April, the budget work group meets pretty much just to set the tone for the April meeting where we discuss budget in detail. We pretty much went over revenues and expenses, the ongoing insurance cost, as well as some of the tenants and the leases. But other than that, we're going to have another meeting, I believe, in the next few weeks to primarily discuss budget after City Council talks about it. So that concludes budget.
Thank you. And I'll make the report for the strategic planning work group. As you can well imagine, our group has continued to collect research and discuss all items related to the next steps in the strategic planning process. Most recently, our meeting on April 15th. We're really pleased to see that today's agenda under new business is focused on the next steps as recommended by the work group, voted on by our commission in October, and subsequently addressed by Director Wilshire and the Waterfront Department. Thank you. Two notes. On item number 3, the review of the California Coastal Act and the Santa Barbara Local Coastal Plan. This definitely provides you with the important facts and policies that will deeply influence the next steps of planning. I really hope you had a chance to review this document and the newest iteration of the dashboard in front of you, which also not only has some information really pertinent to strategic planning, but also guidance on the work of the waterfront and the commission. We know there's a lot to take in, but as we all agreed, we've made it a priority to ensure that every one of us has the right information and the responsibility to know it and be able to refer to it going forward. And then regarding item number 4 on the agenda, today's discussion is going to review the work groups and the waterfront's efforts so far and hopefully lead to direction from the commission on the next steps. As a reminder, we all agreed already that an essential next step must be the involvement of the community, and the work group would like to see this happen next month, if possible, in May. It's also incumbent on us, as we discussed at last month's commission meeting, for the commission to be really directive about work groups. And with that in mind, we should clarify the goal of this work group and time frame going forward tonight, since it's been a year since we started the work and 3 months since the commission identified it as a top priority. And if it is helpful to the commission and the waterfront department, Commissioner Stedman, Nelson, and I believe that our work group goal should be to be instrumental in the launch of the waterfront creation of a strategic plan, and that a reasonable time frame for our work group going forward is 6 more months, i.e. by September 30th. That's my report. Anything to be added by Commissioner Stedman or Nelson?
Did you mention outreach
Yes,
to the public? Oh,
I sure did.
very good.
Thanks.
Great, thank you, Vice Chair. We'll move on to the consent calendar. Item number 1, approval of the minutes. Mr. Lopez, can you please read item number 1, recommendation?
Yes, this is item 1, approval of the minutes. Recommendation that Harbor Commission waive further reading and approve the minutes from the regular meeting of March 20th, 2025.
Great, thank you. Do we have a motion to approve the minutes?
So moved.
Second.
We have a motion and a second. Mr. Lopez, can you please do a vote?
Yes, this is a motion by Vice Chair Ford, seconded by Commissioner Stedman, to approve the minutes in the consent calendar. Commissioner Anderson is absent. Commissioner Cohen?
Yes.
Commissioner Ford?
Aye.
Commissioner McCray is absent. Commissioner Nelson? Aye. Commissioner Steadman?
Yes.
Chair Stanwyck.
Yes.
And that motion passes unanimously with Commissioners Anderson and McCray absent.
Great, thank you. Okay, we can move on to new business. Item number 2, renewal of Eco Wireless license agreement to provide subscription-based wireless internet services to users within the harbor. And Mr. Lopez, can you please read the recommendation for number 2?
Yes, this is item 2. Recommendation that Harbor Commission recommends staff negotiate a new license agreement with Echo Wireless for 1 year while the Waterfront Department considers options for the city to establish its own Wi-Fi network for harbor users.
Great, thank you. I'll turn it over to the waterfront.
Good evening, Chair Stanaway, Commissioners, and members of the public. My name is Cesar Barrios. I am the Waterfront Business Manager. And this evening, I bring to you a request to renew a license agreement with Echo Wireless, which is a wireless internet service provider in the Santa Barbara Harbor. So to provide some background, Echo Wireless USA Incorporated, also referred to as Echo, has been providing wireless internet service to boaters in the Santa Barbara Harbor since 2011. At that time, Echo was selected as a company following a request for proposal process for a provider of a wireless internet. That was something new at the time in the harbor. And since then, it's been quite successful, and it's very popular within a lot of the marina users and also the public that frequents the harbor commercial area. So the Echo service is provided as an additional service to the visiting boaters, since the permittees have an option to direct access to internet via the local cable company that's routed through the slips. The Waterfront Department collects a nominal monthly fee from Echo, as the purpose of the Wi-Fi service is to provide an amenity to harbor users, and rather than being a revenue source for the department. So historically, the department has granted Echo Wireless 5-year lease agreements. However, the current proposal is for 1 year. While we're trying to considering options for the city to provide its own Wi-Fi network within the harbor, not only to boaters in the marinas, but also the public at large that visits the harbor each and every day. The type of service we would like to establish will either be free to the public or low cost, in which the landing page for this network could function as a virtual portal to the harbor, as it could include additional links to our tenant pages, restaurants, gift shops, visitor service stores that we have in the harbor. So the department deems that going with 1 year lease process will be appropriate at this time. So the idea behind the 1 year proposal will be more appropriate as we evaluate and determine what it would take to get this done. There's several steps that we need to take, and we're working closely with our IT department. So here I would like to outline the benefits of this approach. So one is service continuity. So as Echo Wireless existing infrastructure that's currently in place ensures that the existing Wi-Fi service remains uninterrupted during the transitional phase of this project, if it went to come to fruition, and as we're trying to determine if this is something feasible for the department to do. Also, this approach provides flexibility, as the 1 year lease term allows the department to determine the viability of developing our own Wi-Fi network within the harbor. And then the evaluation period, as 1 year lease term, will provide a reasonable time for the Waterfront Department to collaborate with the city's IT department to analyze the benefits and challenges in establishing an internal Wi-Fi network versus continuing a contract with an external service provider. So today's recommendation is that the Harbor Commission recommends staff to negotiate a new license agreement with Echo Wireless for 1 year, while the Waterfront considers options for the city to establish its own Wi-Fi network for its harbor users. And with that, I'll be happy to answer any questions. And following here on my with conclusion, if you allow me. So as a final thought, this recommendation aligns with the Waterfront Department's objectives in providing an economical Wi-Fi network and service for the harbor commercial area and the marina users, as you may see in a lot of cities throughout the country and also in Europe, which is becoming basically a standard feature within the facilities in public spaces. And now I'll be happy to answer any questions. Thank you.
Great, thank you, Mr. Barrios. Question from Commissioner Stedman.
Yes, thank you, Cesar, for the presentation. What are we negotiating? I mean, what's the cost that we're trying to negotiate?
We're trying to negotiate another 1 year with Echo Wireless. The cost is to be determined. We have not engaged Echo Wireless yet. I mean, this lease has several months to go, but as we discussed in the past, the commission is interested in knowing when these leases are coming up well in advance, so you can provide input. The cost to roll out a new Wi-Fi network, city-based, it all depends. I wouldn't want to throw any numbers out there yet because it hasn't been quite determined. It's challenging to have a Wi-Fi network over water. And we've already engaged with our IT department in trying to determine what that would cost, and we have options. But as far as costs, I don't have any information I would feel comfortable sharing because it's not definite yet.
Thanks.
Commissioner Nelson?
Cesar, I'm curious, how do we decide what the fee structure will be for the service? I mean,
Commissioner
the
Nelson.
daily service, the weekly service, and all of that. I mean,
With the current,
yeah, the current 5-year lease is what, $11.95 a day, $34 per. Is that the going rate in harbors and ports, or is that what hotels charge? I don't know. How'd you get to that number?
well, currently that's what was negotiated in the lease back in 2020. So what you see right now in the report as
Oh, so we don't set the fee structure?
we don't.
Ah,
But part of the negotiation would be that we can set that as well to make it more lower cost for the public as well.
okay, thanks.
Commissioner Cohen?
Thank you. When I think of like adding Wi-Fi as a service, like I kind of get nervous. That seems like that's outside of the scope of what the staff usually does, and would be a highly technical undertaking. I mean, I wouldn't want to undertake something like that. Is that something that the staff feels comfortable with? I mean, are there concerns on trying to support, a Wi-Fi network for all of the boats? And also, have there been complaints or concerns with the existing service outside of maybe the cost, or I don't know?
Yeah, no, it's a great question. That's what we're embarking on right now. We think it would be a really good service to mariners to provide and visitors to provide some basic level of internet access, so public internet. It is not that technically challenging, and so we would work with our IT department on that. I mean, it's essentially setting up a mesh network throughout the waterfront. It provides some benefits, some potential revenue opportunities, some advertising opportunities. If you go into an airport or a hotel, they have a captive landing page. So when somebody logs on, we can track data, we can ask them questions, we can engage with them or not. So it just provides a little bit of insight, and so there are some benefits with doing it as well. The city has some interest in doing it as well, and so our IT department would look to us to kind of try it in the harbor. And so I think what we're asking today is, A, if you guys are okay with that line of thinking, and typically we would renegotiate, say, a 5-year lease with Echo, but having that smaller gives us a little bit of time to research setting up our own network, and then if it doesn't work out, we can kind of re-extend with Echo, but if it does, we can figure out a way to phase them out or use our public network if it is appropriate.
Thank you. And then on the question of like, sorry, if there is concern for what the Wi-Fi, like is the quality of Wi-Fi not good right now? Have there been complaints about the Wi-Fi? Have there been concerns about the cost? Like at the end of the day, I would be a little bit concerned that, you know, having a professional company that this is all they do is going to provide more quality Wi-Fi than maybe the harbor, but maybe I'm wrong. Maybe it would be great. But there's a lot of people probably who work in their boats and who are dependent upon having a good connection, and I wouldn't want to jeopardize that.
Yeah, it's not a very utilized service. It's very expensive for what it is. Echo Wireless is not local by any means, and so they're not on site. They're not here to necessarily troubleshoot within any reasonable amount of time. So I'd say cost is the main. I mean, you can just look at their pricing. It's pretty high. So I don't think any locals use it. Any liveaboards will subscribe through a Cox, and so it's really kind of a service for visitors who need it at that moment.
Do we know why their costs are so high and why we think maybe the city can provide it at less?
They're not a local business, and obviously they are a business. They need to turn a profit. We don't necessarily, and we would be here with staffing and services. So I hear your point loud and clear. We can note that your preference is keeping it privatized, but it'd be nice to have that year to look at what internally provided service would look like.
Okay. And then lastly, has there been any talk into maybe providing both so that you would have a free Wi-Fi that people could use if they wanted to, and then if someone wanted an elevated service? My concern would just be that if we're providing a service through the city, that maybe it wouldn't be a good enough connection. And then there's no one really to deal with that except for, you know, us. So.
Yeah, even internally, we can provide essentially a base level of bandwidth internet for kind of public usage. We could also provide a paid tiered structure where we would allow higher bandwidths. And that's really just through the capacity of the network and kind of a software change. So we could do that as well.
Okay. But just so I'm clear also, there hasn't been complaints other than the pricing. Is that my understanding?
Not a slew of them. Again, I don't think a lot of people use the service. We were kind of looking at ways to offer low-cost services to people in the harbor, and free Wi-Fi kind of seems like a great offering that is very standard across other harbors and municipalities and towns. And so it was more providing the offering than being driven out. But having both of them doesn't necessarily make sense if they're both working well.
Makes sense. Thank you.
Yeah, just to provide some color to that, the Eco Wireless is more like a secondary for most people in the harbor. I know a lot of people use Cox Communications. It's a lot more reliable for a lot of people who are working on their boat, because then they have a cable that runs into your boat, into like a Wi-Fi router, and you get very high bandwidth, whereas the Eco Wireless is kind of like a secondary service for people who are like visitors or temporarily there, so. Yeah.
So you can get Cox in the harbor?
You can get Cox,
Okay.
Yep. Commissioner Ford?
Thank you. I felt like I read it, but maybe I'm just making it up. But did you do some research and find that other harbors do have their own network?
Commissioner Ford, it's mixed use. Some do, I believe.
But you did find that some do.
Yes, it's a service. It's a pretty standard service throughout the region in general. I mean, even some cities nowadays are providing this in their downtowns, in their parks. It's becoming pretty standard.
And if we make this recommendation to you, it would seem like you would start right away to do the research on the possibility of making this happen. And then how soon do you need to contact ECHO about the renewal and the shorter period of time?
Normally, we contact them within 90 days prior to renewing, but I mean, it's a public meeting, so
Right. They could know tonight.
correct
On Friday,
So their lease is not up yet for have some months to go. So we'll be in touch with them and see, because they get to negotiate as well. So, I mean, we're proposing 1 year, and at least that's what the time that we need to determine what needs to be done. As we've already been in talks with our IT department.
Great. Sounds like a great idea to me. Thanks.
Great, thank you. Any other questions from the commissioners? Do we have any public comment on this item, Mr. Lopez?
Chair Stanwyck, there are no hands raised and no speaker slips submitted.
Great, thank you. Okay, with that, any other discussion points anybody would like to talk about? Or at this time, a motion would be in order.
I'll make a motion.
Great. Oh,
My motion is that we recommend that staff negotiate a new license agreement with Echo Wireless for 1 year while the Waterfront Department considers options for the city to establish its own Wi-Fi network for harbor users.
thank you, Vice Chair. And Commissioner Nelson has a second. Would anybody like to speak towards this motion? But, sir, did you have a public comment? Would you like to make a public comment?
Well, just a question. I wondered if,
Oh,
Yeah, step
Yeah.
up, please.
I'm sorry, I wasn't scheduled.
oh, no, yeah, you could do a public comment, yeah. Yeah,
Yeah, I'm from the.
yeah, we have, you have, you've,
The other
The other
microphone.
microphone.
that one right there. Yep,
Yes.
Yeah, well, thanks.
yeah, and you have 3 minutes, yep.
Is Live Washburn, and I'm part of the Southern California Coastal Ocean Observing System. And my question to Cesar, is it, would the coverage extend to Stearns Wharf?
Mr. Chair,
Yeah, Mr. Barros, yep. You can, does the coverage for the service for Eco Wireless cover Stearns Wharf, and will the new wireless cover Stearns Wharf as well?
the current idea that we're proposing is primarily to the harbor commercial area, but we could extend to the harbor, to the wharf as well, which if we have, with the Wi-Fi network, we would have to mesh from the point of origin, which will likely be the harbor. So we'll have to determine if getting a signal all the way to the wharf from the harbor is viable. Otherwise, we may have to install equipment up on the wharf as well. That's something that we'll discuss with the Wharf Merchants Association and also with the Harbor Merchants Association as we develop this plan.
The reason I ask, we have oceanographic equipment on the wharf underneath, and we put data live online. It's used for a lot of purposes, search and rescue by the Coast Guard. We have harmful algal blooms in the area which can affect our water quality. And being able to have a backup in terms of a Wi-Fi link at Stearns Wharf could be very helpful to what we do. So thank you very much.
Great, thank you for the comment, appreciate it. Okay, with that, we have a motion on the floor and a second. Anybody like to speak towards the motion? Okay, I know for one, I mean, I think this would be a good idea. I think just, in the past week, one person who was a visiting boat already asked me what the Wi-Fi was for the harbor. So I think it'd be a good option. So, okay, with that, Mr. Lopez, can you please repeat the motion?
Yes, this is a motion by Vice Chair Ford, seconded by Commissioner Nelson, that Harbor Commission recommends staff negotiate a new license agreement with Echo Wireless for 1 year while the Waterfront Department considers options for the city to establish its own Wi-Fi network for harbor users.
Great, and with that, we'll take a vote, please.
Commissioner Cohen?
Yes. Yes.
Commissioner Ford?
Aye.
Commissioner McCray is absent. Commissioner Nelson?
Aye.
Commissioner Stedman?
Yes.
Commissioner Anderson?
Yes.
And Chair Stanwyck.
Yes.
And that motion passes unanimously with Commissioner McCray absent.
Great, thank you. Okay, moving on to new business. Item number 3, the review of the California Coastal Act and the Santa Barbara Local Coastal Program. Mr. Lopez, can you please read the recommendation first?
Yes, this is item 3, recommendation that Harbor Commission receive a presentation on the California Coastal Act and Santa Barbara Local Coastal Program with a focus on how these governing policies apply to and influence planning at the waterfront.
Great, thank you. Yep, we'll turn it over to the waterfront.
Yeah, thank you, Chair, Commission, and members of the public. I'm Mike Wilshire, Waterfront Director. For this item, we'll be providing some background on the Coastal Act and Local Coastal Program and really how it specifically governs the waterfront and the harbor. So the reason we're doing this now is it was brought up through, as Commissioner Ford mentioned, brought up through our strategic planning process. I think just about every meeting we had, we talked about the local coastal program in some way. The local coastal program is just such an important planning document for the waterfront. I felt it'd be good to provide an in-depth overview so that we all have a good handle on it. Also joining us tonight is Melissa Hetrick. So she's the Energy and Climate Program Manager with the Sustainability and Resiliency Department. She really is our in-house expert guru on everything local coastal program and Coastal Act. So very appreciative that she's been willing to be here to present. She was also very involved in the 2019 revision, which was the most recent revision of the local coastal program. So I'll present the first couple slides and then hand it over to Ms. Hetrick. Next slide. So the local coastal program applies to the entire coastal zone as a reminder, but we'll really focus on the pieces that are most relevant to the waterfront and the harbor and Stearns Wharf. The intent is for all of us to leave here with a better understanding and how this document and policy is used for planning within the waterfront. Next slide. And also from an overarching planning point of view, there are a lot of policies and plans in place that apply to the city and to the waterfront. Some, just to name a few, so the city's general plan, what we're speaking about tonight, the local coastal program, our municipal codes, specifically section 17 and 28.070. And then the 30-year waterfront adaptation plan, which is underway right now. The Sustainability Department came and spoke to the Harbor Commission in November, still very much in process. And then we have our internal processes, the financial budget and capital improvement program processes that are very much planning oriented for not only the waterfront, but all city departments. Again, this list isn't exhaustive, but just trying to give some idea that there are a number, at any given time, a number of governing planning documents that we need to refer to and kind of abide by. With that, I'll pass it over to Ms. Hetrick and to get in a little more detail with Coastal Act and local coastal program.
Thank you. Next slide. So just a little background on the Coastal Act. It actually originated from a proposition. In 1972, Proposition 20 was passed by the voters, and then after that, the state legislature made the act permanent in 1976. And really what led up to the proposition and the passage of the act was a fast-paced development in California. So a lot of industrial uses being put offshore. The Santa Barbara oil spill happened right before this. And in addition, there was a number of large-scale residential developments that were proposed, like Sea Ranch being one of them, that proposed privatizing the shoreline and access to the beach. And so when you look at the Coastal Act and the proposition, one of the biggest goals of the act is maximizing public access to the coast and the shoreline and beaches, and making sure that we're prioritizing land uses on our shoreline for coastal dependent uses as opposed to like private residential or other uses. So the Coastal Act also has a suite of policies that protect water quality and coastal resources. It requires that any development in the coastal zone get a permit that shows conformance with the act. And then it requires each jurisdiction along the coast to create and certify a local coastal program, which guides land use and development on their portion of coast. So next slide. So this is the city's coastal zone. It's approximately a half a mile in from the sea, and generally south of Highway 101 and Cliff Drive. The city's coastal zone is about 6 miles long. 70% of it is in public ownership, and that's really an astounding number when you look at the rest of the coast. Next slide. So it's really it was very intentional of the city to make such a big portion of our coastal zone public, and in fact, the entire public waterfront was obtained over time by the city with that expressive goal. And if you really look at our coastal zone with our next to free beaches and recreational assets, and then our working harbor, it really is the beacon that the coastal zone was hoping to see in most places. And the Coastal Commission is very aware of what kind of example Santa Barbara shows in this regard. So next slide. So the city's local coastal program serves as the standard of review for any coastal development permits that we issue, but it also guides our land use decisions and management of the waterfront area. It consists of two parts. It consists of the land use plan, which prioritizes uses in the coastal zone, and then also contains a number of regulations and policies regarding public access and resource protection. And then also included in the local coastal program are implementing ordinances, essentially our zoning code and Title 22, that specify very specific uses and densities of uses allowed. Next slide. So in 2019, there was a comprehensive update of the land use plan done. The original one was certified in 1980, and since then, a number of other plans had become like appendix to it, and there'd been a number of different initiatives. So one of the biggest portions of the update was really compiling and putting together all those different policy documents, one of which was the 1996 Harbor Master Plan, which really guided the use and management of the harbor, but also included a needs assessment of various capital projects that needed to happen in the harbor. But by the time 2019 rolled around, almost all of those capital projects had been completed. So really what was rolled into the overall LCP was all the policy and management. And that was really intentional to combine those because at the time the Harbor Commission and Council wanted to make sure that the whole waterfront was being managed consistently. And so that process involved an LCP subcommittee that included harbor commissioners. It was reviewed and forwarded to the council by the Harbor Commission. And in addition, really a big portion of the document focuses on waterfront specific priorities and planning tools. Next slide. So there's a number of sections in the land use plan and a lot of very detailed policies. But next, I think the next slide, it might be a dynamic slide. But really the ones we're going to focus on are the coastal dependent section, the coastal hazards section, the public access section, and the visitor serving section. Next slide. So this is the section 2.2, the coastal dependent section that really focuses on the waterfront. This is where we see a lot of policies talking about support for making the harbor a working harbor, making sure that we're supporting commercial fishing and recreation. In addition, this is where we see policies stating that Stearns Wharf should primarily be an open space use, a place for visitors to view the beauty of the waterfront and recreate. And next slide. So the implementing ordinance for this section is section 2870, and this really talks about keeping the harbor as a working harbor, prioritizing ocean-dependent uses in the harbor, commercial area, and secondarily allowing visitor serving and ocean-related uses, and trying to really achieve the right mix, with the primary uses being things like marinas, boatyards, government facilities, commercial fishing services, and related activities. And then the secondary uses being things like supportive uses, museums, bait shops, boat sales, boat storage, boat repair, ocean-related equipment rental, restaurants, event spaces, marine storage, office space, public parking, et cetera. And there are policies within both the code section and the LUP that require that every 5 years the Harbor Commission review these mix of uses and how they're actually playing out in the harbor, and to see if the right mix is really being achieved to achieve the status of a working harbor. In addition, this code section addresses Stearns Wharf, which really incorporates a lot more visitor-serving uses, so things like art galleries, restaurants, museums, marine businesses. So next slide. In addition, there's a number of public access policies related to the waterfront, primarily prioritizing public access to the shoreline and beach, particularly with sea level rise affecting our bluff-back beaches. There's a big priority that outside of the harbor area and the waterfront that we really try to achieve keeping our beach sand, keeping beach uses in the waterfront area. In addition, this section addresses public access via parking. And this is definitely a hot topic with the Coastal Commission. Santa Barbara has a wealth of low-cost parking along our waterfront, but other jurisdictions throughout the state have problems with this. And so as part of this 2019 update, we did identify what we're calling key public access parking areas, which include all the waterfront parking lots. And there are a lot of restrictions to changing those parking lots and in the way of like significantly reducing number of spaces or significantly increasing fees. If we were to try to do that, we would have to do a study to look at whether or not that would affect public access to the coast. So that was part of the 2019 update. In addition, there's policies in there recognizing Stearns Wharf parking and the Santa Barbara City College shared parking arrangements. And I think that's it. Yeah, next slide. In addition, the visitors serving and recreation facilities has a number of policies supporting our recreational amenities in the waterfront area, in particular volleyball, the arts and crafts show, the multi-use path. In addition, there's policies regarding cruise ships and responsibly providing shoreline services and making sure that we're keeping things clean with the cruise ship operations. Next slide. In the coastal hazards section, there's information about the harbor dredging and how important that is to keeping the harbor operations going, but also to making sure that we're getting sand out of what is the sand trap of the harbor and moving it down coast for our down coast beaches, but also our neighbors' down coast beaches. And there's also policies supporting use of that sand and the use of sand berms to prevent erosion of our beaches. There's quite a few policies about trying to keep beach sand and avoiding seawalls unless absolutely necessary. In addition, anything that's built seaward of Cabrillo Boulevard has to meet specific development standards that make sure that the development is safe from things like wave action and wave uprush. Next slide. So in summary, the harbor in particular is a priority coastal use, I would say, throughout the region and the state. There is a wealth of coastal access and recreational opportunities for residents and visitors, and really moving forward, looking into the 30-year plan, we are hoping to not only keep those, but make them better. Next slide. Again, the coastal LUP really prioritizes the harbor uses and the harbor commercial area for continued operations and improvements over time. And, we'll be looking at, through the 30-year plan, planning for sea level rise, but also just in the near term, adapting our waterfront to increase coastal storms action that we're seeing. Next slide. And this just has some links to some of the LCP sections and to our website. So with that, we can take any questions.
Great, thank you, Ms. Sedgwick. One of the things I was going to ask about was, and actually, can you please put up the slide on section 28.70 that was just up there? Just one of the things I know in the Santa Barbara Municipal Code is there's a whole section on definitions. And one of the things I think the Harbor Commission has always wondered about was the definition of a working harbor. And right here it says the harbor will remain primarily a working harbor with visitor serving and ocean-related uses, secondary to ocean-dependent uses. Can you kind of give us, like, in your opinion, the definition of like a working harbor?
Chair Stanwyck, that's a very good question. I'm not sure my definition would be agreed by everybody. There is no definition that I've seen in the LUP. It talks a lot about ensuring commercial fishing and then recreational boating opportunities to both residents and visitors being like the primary aspects of that. There's a lot of talk about ensuring that all users and income types are not only allowed in the harbor, but encouraged. I know that that's been a high priority of both the city and the Coastal Commission for our harbor over time, given all the pressure to make it, an exclusive yacht harbor. So no, I don't have an exact definition. Other harbors that have kind of moved away from becoming a working harbor have had certain percentages of slips and things like that that they are gearing toward. But we have never defined that because I think to date it's really been working, the mix of uses. So unfortunately, I don't have a.
Okay, that's okay. I was just curious if you had any insight to that, because I think the primary uses and secondary uses, that the list kind of is a pretty good idea of what we're going at when they're saying working harbor. Just kind of curious, but yeah, thank you.
Chair Stack, just to add on to that a little bit, I think it was fairly intentional with the 5-year review of leases and kind of allowing Harbor Commission and Planning Commission and the public to weigh in. And so if you kind of set something in stone with a certain mix, it may change over time. So that gives the flexibility to touch base on it and say, hey, Harbor Commission, does this mix still seem appropriate? Hey, Planning Commission, does this mix still seem appropriate in a public setting? And so that may that like public perception may change over time. So I think that flexibility was intentional.
Got it. Great, thanks. With that, Commissioner Nelson.
To build on that, that's one of the things that we'd hope to do with the strategic planning process is to consult with the public, to consult with the stakeholders, to consult with the 61 tenants we have here, to get their idea on whether or not we should look at our lease policy to increase the number of coastal dependent or ocean dependent uses. One of the conversations that's going on now is the importance of the blue economy to Santa Barbara. And as we dipped into that discussion, maritime industries became not just commercial fishing or recreational boating or recreational fishing, but maritime industries, which would clearly, I guess in our interpretation, be coastal dependent uses that would be, something that the commission could recommend. So we're going to have like 3 buckets, the related, the dependent, and the visitor serving buckets, and try to make recommendations to maybe adjust that. And what I hear you saying is that was the flexibility that you intended to do. And I even noticed that you mentioned that the Harbor Commission shall prepare a report and make recommendations to the Planning Commission. Really what happens is the Waterfront Department prepares the report, we review it, and we say, yes, we're still doing a good job, we've got balance here, move it on. Was there any thought when you were writing those chapters that the Harbor Commission should take a more active role in it? Because that's obviously something the strategic planning exercise would look at.
Commissioner Nelson, those policies regarding the 5-year, those were holdovers from the original LCP and the Harbor Master Plan. So they weren't written in 2019. But I think what you're talking about, the flexibility with the change of uses is really important, as Mr. Wilshire mentioned, because over time, different needs change in the maritime world and for Santa Barbara. And I think as long as we're sticking to the general policies in here regarding like income types and types of mix of uses and mix of berthing types and all that kind of stuff, then I think the flexibility is a great thing.
And finally, I noticed in your report, Director Wilshire, you said there was collaboration occurring between the Sustainability Division, the Waterfront Department, and Parks and Rec. I am assuming that you are informing, as part of your collaboration, that, hey, here's the local coastal plan, what we can do and what we can't do, because I can imagine some of the suggestions that will be received by the sustainability group may differ or depart from the three categories that will drive our process. So I'm just kind of curious, is there a conversation between parks, waterfront department, and sustainability about what's possible? You know, that we don't forget the coastal plan. Is that part of the conversation, or is sea level rise, you know, has primacy above everything else?
Yeah, that's a good question, Commissioner Nelson. I think we're really lucky as a city. So having Ms. Hetrick in Sustainability Department, as well as Timmy Bolton, all these folks that I've personally worked with for years and years and years, and they were instrumental in Coastal Act and local coastal program. And so they're quite honestly our reference for that material. We've had multiple meetings for the waterfront adaptation plan. Will involve the Harbor Commission and Parks and Recs Commission as we evolve through that, because we were here in November as well. But the short answer is yes, we're meeting frequently and often and weighing all of that. But and Ms. Cedric can weigh in as well. Sea level rise is a big component of that, and how we're going to manage that. I mean, we're partway through $1.5 million grant funded effort to plan the way that the waterfront is going to look and deal with those kind of storms in the future right now. And so we're at an interesting time that we kind of need to see that through and see what comes of that and how we can weave all that together. But I think, in my opinion at least, the local coastal program and Coastal Act underpin the entire thing.
And finally, that's a great answer. And finally, as you recall, the Waterfront Department, the work group, the strategic planning work group, wanted to create a process that wasn't going to be like the airports and take 2 years and $900,000 to set priorities, and that we come up with a cost-effective and a planning approach that could be accomplished more quickly than the classic harbor master planning process. We also endeavored to try to identify fund sources that wouldn't require depletion of your general operating funds to perform. And we found that other coastal jurisdictions, harbors and ports sort of blend the funds that they receive from the Coastal Commission to update their local coastal plans. They also use those funds to update their harbor master plans. And is it possible that with this collaborative effort that you're having with all of the departments, you can suggest that we would like to do a strategic planning process, and in conversations for funding? I mean, for example, we looked at something that the Channel Islands Harbor did. It was a visioning plan. The local staff, waterfront staff, did a lot of the preliminary work. It only cost about $100,000. So if you're doing a $1.3 million plan for sea level rise adaptation, finding $100,000 to better implement, if you will, the local coastal plan wouldn't seem to be a difficult thing to raise in discussions. So is it possible for this collaboration that's going on interagency to discuss possibly funding our strategic planning exercise?
Yeah, and Commissioner Nelson, I'm not sure if it was in a work group meeting or in a Harbor Commission meeting, but I recall speaking with you about the city essentially centralizes our grant process. And so departments can kind of advocate that, but it's very much like a one city approach.
Right.
I'm at that table. Ms. Hedrick is very much at that table, very well versed, and so we're kind of strategically going after funds. The reality is the funding climate with grants has changed dramatically in the last year, and so we're being a little bit more critical on looking at those sort of things. As we work through this, and our next item is talking more about strategic planning, there's really an intention to sort of let some other processes lead, and then we can figure out where those gaps are as the waterfront. And so the fact that we're embarking on a waterfront adaptation plan that has probably 50-60% of that $1.3 million is going to stuff that directly impacts the waterfront and the harbor. I think we would be premature to get out too far ahead of that on our own.
Okay.
And so just trying to give that some time to come to fruition.
Okay.
Great. Commissioner Ford?
Thank you. Ms. Hedrick, I thought the summary was really excellent and exactly, I think, what our work group was looking for the commission, so I appreciate that. I did want to let you know that while we were talking about a working harbor, I asked ChatGPT for the definition, so I was wondering if I could read it to you and you could tell me whether it works. It sounds pretty reasonable. A working harbor is a waterfront area actively used for maritime industries and activities. It typically serves as a hub for commercial operations such as fishing, shipping, cargo handling, boat maintenance, shipbuilding, or even ferry services. Unlike recreational harbors, primarily intended for leisure activities like yachting or tourism, a working harbor is focused on economic and industrial purposes, often involving heavy equipment, warehouses, other infrastructure, that may be necessary for marine commerce and transportation. How does that work for you?
I love it. And, well, I would just say, having talked with a lot of people throughout the region, I think the huge value of our harbor with regard to like having Long Beach and the city of LA so much just like ports, the fact that we provide commercial fishing resources in addition to lower cost recreational vessels, it is huge. Like that they really value that throughout the region. So I think that your definition definitely works for that. And I would just build on what Mr. Wilshire said. The 30-year waterfront plan, the funding for that is really focused toward resilience, and also Coastal Conservative funded was really looking at like capital improvements and how we're going to protect the harbor. And one of the goals of that plan, and the reason the time frame was 30 years, is that really is a time frame where we can keep most of our uses, if not all of our uses, and really just look at different ways to manage them before we have to make like big decisions about what we're going to do with larger scale flood protection measures and much higher hazard levels. And so I think that there's a lot more opportunity. It's not going to be, as dire as I maybe are thinking. But I do think it will provide a good constraints analysis for what's possible in the next 30 years that will be a perfect launching point for other planning activities. And the other thing I would just mention is that our team is happy to come to your subcommittee meeting and work directly with that subcommittee if that's desired.
Thanks.
Commissioner Sedman?
Yeah, thank you everyone for your comments, and thanks for opening up the discussion on 2870, Chair Stanwyck. So just for the record, right, 2870 calls out the primary use being a working harbor, and thank you for your LLM offering. However, just for the record, only 24% of the current uses in the leasing inventory are for coastal dependent uses. So the other two areas that we use to analyze all those leases are coastal related at 33% and visitor serving at 43%. So by definition, we're only at 24%, right? If we look at the data, the leases, the money, right? It seems like the rest of this is just debate. But the numbers are there showing that we're out of balance. Thank you.
Commissioner, just to that point, those are the leases. That does not
Right.
include, every slip in the harbor is a coastal dependent use, so we very much value recreational boating in parity with commercial uses, and so it's balancing those two uses. All of our programs like Catamaran Beach, Outriggers, these are all ocean-dependent uses. And so limiting that just to the leases, our leases in big part, you look at something like Stearns Wharf, that's primarily visitor serving. And so out of our mix of leases,
Absolutely.
the visitor serving portion of the mix is really only handled through our leases. And so it's you need to kind of include the totality of the harbor itself in the mix.
That's fair context, and I appreciate that for the record.
Commissioner Anderson.
Yeah, thank you, Director, for lining up the presentation, and Ms. Eddick for giving it. It's something that I think we've all been eager to hear for a while. Two questions for me. One's kind of a 101 question. Can we go back to the map of the purview within the city? I'm just wondering, I see how far it goes inland, but how far into the water do you guys have purview? Or, I'm interested in the energy side of things, if you are at all in charge of the oil wells or the possible wind out there. How far out into the water do you go?
No, it's pretty short. I mean, 3 miles out. is
3 miles?
typically, yeah.
Okay.
The coastal, oh, yeah. The
For our
coastal
purview.
goes 3 miles, but our offshore leasing jurisdiction is less.
Yeah, much less. I mean,
Then,
to
yeah.
put it in perspective, we lease some land from some water space from the state of California to make up part of our mooring field. And so that's like
Very good.
very,
Yeah.
very, very close to shore.
Stearns Wharf, obviously the whole thing.
Yeah, correct.
Yeah, okay. And the other question goes to the parking. I believe it's AB 2097. We've talked about a few times up here. What's the Coastal Commission's, that's the one I believe where if you're within a half a mile of a major public transportation hub, and I believe it's if you're private, the parking requirements no longer are applicable. At one point, I heard the Coastal Commission was going to review that and have an opinion on if they were going to fall in line with that or not. What did you guys decide? Have you decided how you're going to handle that?
Yes, Commissioner Anderson, the whole parking issue is tricky, mostly because of other jurisdictions throughout the state where things have not gone well, where certain jurisdictions, like you can think of ones down south, or certain beaches where there's no parking allowed, even though there's tons of space for it, and it's very intentional to try to privatize beach access. Santa Barbara doesn't really have that problem right now, at least, and we've intentionally managed our parking resources to not have that problem. So when we were negotiating the 2019 Coastal Land Use Plan, kind of the Coastal Commission's first position was that that we should be managing all parking throughout the coastal zone, like any private parking, any on-street parking, any off-street parking. But really, because we have so much parking for the beach on our waterfront and surrounding areas, we did, and also lots of things like bus uses, and you're able to bike, and we don't want parking just taking over our entire coastal zone. We basically negotiated creating these key public access parking areas that we would heavily watch and make sure that they are like lower cost and available to everyone, and not, overused and all this stuff, but not get too into the weeds outside of those areas. There is a provision in the LUP that if some citywide measure were just like significantly reduce parking on street, that would affect use of the waterfront lots, then we might have to look at that with regard to the Coastal Act policies. But that would really have to be a a really big parking restriction to get to that level. And I think you guys would want to review that because it would affect your lots anyways. So that's how that got resolved in our case. That is not how it's getting resolved in other jurisdictions. And depending on how various state legislation is written, it's either, the Coastal Act is either above it in priority or not. And so I actually am not super familiar with that particular Senate bill that about whether, how that applies to us, because we have a different provision in our coastal land use plan.
One piece of information, we are embarking on a waterfront-wide parking study. So this is something that hasn't been done in over a decade, maybe more than 15 years. It applies a little bit to this, but mainly for our tenants' purposes. If our tenants want to change a use or do an improvement that is outside of what their existing use is, the permit requirements do require a parking analysis. And so instead of them having to do that on a one-off basis, so we, the waterfront, are working with a consultant right now on a contract to essentially do a waterfront-wide parking study. So it's like a demand analysis, essentially.
Great. Also, one other question regarding parking. I know that in the staff report, there was Santa Barbara City College and city shared parking. The parking lot near the track, is that available with a waterfront permit? Because I know sometimes I've heard it is available. Sometimes when the parking lot is full, it's available. Can you guys just provide some clarity on that? If a waterfront parking permit is allowed in the City College track area?
Chair Stanwyck, yes, I can answer that question for you. So we have a joint use agreement with City College, and for the summer months, waterfront or parking permits are valid from Memorial Day through Labor Day in those two lots, the track lot. We call them La Playa West and La Playa East. And then that's, again, only during the summer months.
Okay, in the summer months, Memorial Day to Labor Day.
Correct.
Okay, so you could park there with a waterfront parking permit. You don't need to get one of those kiosk tickets from the City College then during that?
That's correct.
Okay, great, thanks. Also, one other question I had was in the staff report, the harbor commercial area policies, it says that there needs to be like a laundromat, a mail service center, a visitor center. With all the visitors that are in the harbor and walking around, at the yacht club and Brophy Brothers, is there a public accessible automatic external defibrillator or an AED that's available, in case of any issue that happens with all these people in the area? I know that the City College track has one right in the middle that anybody could just grab in case everybody needs it. Is there one that's available for use that's there?
Chair Stanwyck, yes, I know there is. There's one in our office. I believe there's one in the Maritime Museum, and they're in kind of various buildings around. I could definitely make that public, because I don't know offhand exactly where they all are, but our intention was to kind of have them in accessible areas.
Great, thanks. Okay, any other questions? Yep.
I think there's an app that you can download that shows all of those AEDs locally. The fire department developed it.
And one other thing to note is Harbor Patrol is fully trained EMT and carries all that equipment with them, so they're typically the first ones to respond on scene with that sort of call, especially when they're that close to our offices.
Great, thanks. Okay. Yep. Commissioner Nelson.
Thank you for your offer to work with our work group. That can really be valuable to make certain that we don't recommend something that is really way off base. So thank you for that. I'm sure we're going to do that.
Commissioner Anderson, did you? Oh, okay. Mr. Lopez, do we have any public comment on the item?
There are no hands raised on Zoom and no speaker slips were submitted.
Oh, sure. Yeah, absolutely. Yep, come up to the mic and, just state your name and then you have 3 minutes. Thanks.
Jeff Burkess, and I'm going to keep it a lot shorter. When we got to the definition of a working harbor, that's a really delicate issue. I've been in part of the dance with the harbor for over 40 years now, and it is a rather elegant dance between the sailors and the power boaters and the fishermen. And we have to be a little bit careful, because if you want to point towards more and more of a working harbor as defined there, it's more like a port, and it's kind of dirty business. And if we're trying to bring in terms of the pollutants, in terms of the use, and if we're going to try to maintain a balance with the community interface to the harbor, I think that the plan that they're in the middle of right now is what should define what a working harbor is for Santa Barbara. And I think that's a very important distinction to make. Thank you.
Great, thank you, Mr. Burkus. Okay, any other public comment or questions from the commission? Okay, looks like that is it, and thank you, Mrs. Hetrick. We appreciate your time. Okay, we can move on to item number 4, the waterfront strategic planning discussion. Mr. Lopez, can you please read the recommendation?
Yes, this is item 4, recommendation that Harbor Commission A discuss the status of strategic planning efforts identified at the Strategic Planning Work Group, review the draft strategic planning policy data dashboard, discuss parallel citywide strategic planning efforts, and make recommendations to staff on next steps for a waterfront-specific strategic plan, and B, formally establish a scope of work and time frame for the Strategic Planning Work Group.
Great, thank you. Turn over to the waterfront.
All right, Harbor Commission. This very much ties into what we were just talking about. We kind of went back and forth as having it as a single item, but I think this kind of gives us some freedom to talk about strategic planning specifically. But as we just heard, very, very much ties into the existing local coastal program. So my intention here is just to provide a bit of an update on what the strategic work group's been up to, a chance for us to discuss next steps, and really kind of just have an open conversation about it. Next slide. So a reminder to the commission and the public how the strategic planning work group came about. It was formed at a Harbor Commission meeting on January 18th, 2024, so a little over a year ago. It wasn't specifically on the agenda, but this is when Harbor Commission was assigning members to various work groups, which kind of gave us the freedom to discuss and create a work group that had not existed prior. So I recently reviewed the work group, and it was formed with kind of a high-level scope of looking at strategic planning. There was no real specific timeline or exact specific scope. Hopefully we can address that later in the meeting. And the work group has met several times over the last year with staff, myself, and some other staff members as well. One reminder, we did bring the strategic planning item back to the full Harbor Commission on October 17th. I won't read the whole motion, but just to kind of summarize some of the points. The consensus was to consider development of a waterfront strategic plan, and specifically not a more time-consuming harbor master plan. Focus on compliance with the Coastal Act and local coastal program. The motion urged all harbor commissioners to read and understand existing plans and policies in place, which very much drove the presentation we just heard, and to involve the Harbor Commission and the public in the process. Next slide. One of the major outcomes early on was for staff to create a waterfront policy dashboard. And so a draft dashboard has been provided to harbor commissioners, so nicely laminated. Even though it's laminated, it's still draft. It's still very changeable. And I think the intention here was to have a quick reference guide that lays out some high-level policies. It calls out some guidelines, priorities for the waterfront. I heard it already come into play with some percentages of leases earlier, so it's being put to use. The digital copy dashboard is a little more useful. There's a lot of links in there to the Coastal Act, to local coastal program, municipal code, Brown Act, all the things that govern the waterfront and the Harbor Commission. And again, this was a first crack that was put together pretty collaboratively by the Strategic Planning Work Group and staff. So nothing is set in stone. If some trying to get the entire local coastal program and coastal act into an 11 by 17 piece of paper is really, really difficult. So we can certainly kind of tweak how that looks, or if there's something that will be more valuable to have at your fingertips. Next slide. Here's a copy of the waterfront policy data dashboard, and so this is also included publicly. It was attached to the staff report for this meeting. This just kind of gives the public and everybody watching the meeting what the harbor commissioners now have in their hand. So it's a public document, so anybody can access it or have access to it anytime. Next slide. And we talked about this a little bit in the previous presentation, but just to kind of go over some fairly large parallel strategic planning efforts that the waterfront is tangentially involved in and the city is very much involved in. The city council is embarking on a strategic planning process, so they have a meeting on May 2nd of this year from 9 a.m. to 5 p.m. So a full day meeting at Chase Palm Beach House. And so the intention there is to run through a strategic planning process with city council to see, kind of align on their priorities. Additionally, just yesterday, so myself and the city executive team had a full day consultant-led strategic planning process. So the intention here was to focus on vision and identifying strategic priorities across departments and kind of feed those up so they're at the ready for when council meets on May 2nd. And additionally, not to remind the Harbor Commission and the public, so the Harbor Commission meets annually for our priority setting workshop. This process has been really valuable kind of in that 1 to 2 to 3 year time range. It's typically policy focused, but it really kind of allows staff to craft agendas and work on policy changes that is driven by Harbor Commission and the public. Next slide. This is a little smaller and kind of just a brain dump of a lot of the other things that are out there. We spoke about the city general plan. That's really intended as sort of like a 20 to 30 year long range plan that governs land use and vision. Local coastal program, I won't get into that because we talked about that at length. 30-year waterfront adaptation plan, so that's very much in progress right now. And then internal stuff, operational plans that happen within the city and staff. So our financial plan, we'll be meeting next week on our 2-year budget, so our fiscal year 26-27 budget. As a part of our budget, we do not only a financial analysis, but a capital improvement plan. So looking at projects and the dollars we need for those projects in not only the next 2 years, but a 5-year window. Sediment management plan, Ms. Hetrick spoke about that. We're fairly constrained on how we can move sand around the beach, dredge, do beach activities, grooming, all that sort of thing is governed by our 10-year sediment management plan. And then I mentioned up there the citywide leasing guidelines. So this is something we've talked about at the strategic level. It doesn't exist. I think this is a real area where we could grapple with and make some meaningful change from a strategic planning point of view. Next slide. All right, so with where we're at today and everything that's going on, we have a lot of information gathering up to this point. It's for some loose staff recommendations. So really it's staff recommendation to take all of the energy that we have now and work on a citywide leasing policy. So this part would be kind of the first step in a strategic plan. This would allow the creation of something that isn't in place. It would greatly allow us to kind of help govern and allow the public and Harbor Commission to weigh in on how our leased spaces are utilized. And this process would very much involve Harbor Commission, Airport Commission, all of the departments that hold leases. And I mentioned it briefly before, but it would be our recommendation to hold off on all the broader topic strategic planning efforts, as there are really so many concurrent efforts going on right now that we need to give the time and space, especially because they are council-led. So we really want to have these efforts inform the waterfront so that we're not multitasking and kind of planning over top of each other. So as far as it goes with the strategic planning work group, one staff recommendation would be either to dissolve it now, knowing that we're going to go looking into revising a citywide lease policy, or at minimum for the entire Harbor Commission to define what that work group is going to do next and a time frame for that work group. So next slide. And I think with that, I'll turn it back to the commission.
Great, thank you, Director Wiltshire. Do we have any questions from the commission? Commissioner Nelson.
I hate sequential things. I hate that you have to wait to begin planning a harbor. Do you have any idea what you just described, the duration of the sea level rise planning process and do you have any idea the duration of the City Council strategic planning exercise as well as the sea level rise adaptation study? So what are we talking about? Because I don't really want to dissolve this group until we've initiated the process and it's off and running. So do you know what
Yeah, no, it's a
I'm
good.
talking about?
I share your passion for efficiency and working things in parallel, and knowing that the Waterfront and the Harbor Commission only have so much bandwidth, I think the area of leases is where we really can work, and so it's kind of looking for a way to take a bite at the apple while these other things kind of unfold. The City Council, they're meeting on May 2nd, which is not that far away, so it's kind of to be determined the outcome of that. The Waterfront Adaptation Plan is a 18-month project before we see returns from that, and they're 6 to 8 months in. So at least by next year, 2026, we're hoping to get a plan and some tangible return on that. Realistically, if we want to dig into a leasing guidelines and leasing policy, it would likely take us that amount of time anyway, knowing that looking at the leasing policy was priority number 2 on the Harbor Commission's list. I think that is a elegant way for us to utilize our meetings in the next year without having to essentially wait for tangential process.
Commissioner Cohen?
Thank you. 2 questions. One is, when you say that you would want us to look at leasing policy, I assume you're talking about the real estate leasing and not the slip rentals. Is that correct?
Yeah, correct. And so this would be for how we manage our leased spaces. And so that was the priority of the Harbor Commission back in January, or the second priority. And so trying to honor that.
Okay. And then what would you envision that looking like? Would that be a effort that would be within a subgroup, or is that an effort that would be with the full commission, or is that something that would have public comment and go through a whole process? What is your vision for
Yeah,
that?
all of the above. The city doesn't currently have a standardized leasing guidelines. All of our leases operate somewhat independently, and so coming up with a policy that governs how we manage our leased spaces would involve definitely a work group, probably a combined work group with other departments who hold leases as well, so airport, parks and rec, to consolidate with them and make sure they're aware of what's going on, running through the process of Harbor Commission, council, the whole process.
And when you say like the whole process, you mean reviewing the tenants, reviewing the lease terms, or would it just be when, because there's not a lot that we can, we don't get a lot of opportunity, as Commissioner Nelson always likes to remind us, to actually help when there is a vacancy, usually by the time that comes to us. So is that would be the key focus, is trying to make that process more, inclusive of commissioners and maybe more successful when we do get tenants in there? Is that the vision?
I think the goal would be to define those processes.
Okay.
So I know there's been a lot of questions on tenant in good standing, when we renegotiate with a tenant, how we do that, when we go up to an RFP versus not. It would be sort of a governing document and a policy that gets buy-in and agreeance from all departments involved, all commissions involved, and ultimately city council, so that there is a roadmap, so that those decisions aren't being made by necessarily a staff or commission, or, there isn't an existing leasing guidelines policy, and so it would be crafting that process and flow.
Okay,
Better defining requirements of a tenant in good standing, better defining the RFP process, what that looks like, when we go out for RFP versus when we don't. So it would be a policy document that would ultimately have to be approved by yourselves and council.
okay. And this would be, I assume, staff-driven?
The staff create, we bring policy to the boards and commissions for your approval.
I mean, if the process of looking and doing all of this would be staff-driven, not commission-driven. Is that my understanding?
I'm not fully understanding. It would, yes, any policy that the city creates is staff-generated and staff-driven, and with the, liaising with commissions and bringing it to commissions for the advice and input before ultimately going to council for approval.
Thank you.
Commissioner Ford.
Thanks. I have a couple questions. First, I don't think in the report that we received on Friday that you made a recommendation to disband the strategic planning work group. So I think in the report it said to establish a timeframe and goals. So what has happened between last week and tonight that makes you change that recommendation?
I mean, the recommendation still stands, just in looking at and after attending the strategic planning process all day yesterday with my coworkers and executives, I was really looking for areas where we can take action. And so I think that leasing policy is one of those actions. And in the vein of trying to be more controlled and deliberate with our work groups, if there isn't a defined process or task list ahead of this work group, then maybe it should pivot to a leasing policy work group or something of that nature. We really need to get away from these work groups that just kind of stay open without direct direction from the
I
Harbor
agree.
Commission. And so, in my opinion, that was one possible path.
I appreciate that. I was going to ask more about what your meeting was like today. So what did it entail? And also, what do you envision happening on May 2nd? Do you envision that there will be some discussion about the harbor?
I don't necessarily want to speculate on where council will go. That is their process, and so I'm hoping that I'll be in the room and present, but I don't want to speculate on what their particular priorities are right now. I think as appointed commissioners from them, you're more than free to reach out to your council members and
We
talk
can
with-
also attend.
Yeah.
Of course.
So could you just describe a little bit more about the meeting today? So how did that lead on strategic planning? How did that lead you to?
Oh, our executive meeting yesterday?
Yeah, oh, it was yesterday,
Yeah,
sorry.
yeah, no, it was an all-day thing yesterday, and we essentially kind of raised our department's priorities in a collaborative way to figure out what the cities to kind of cohesively operate as one city. And so that was part of the driving force to push us in this direction, which isn't very far from where we were to begin with. And so I have no heartburn if the work group wants to remain and we can keep going down the path under the blanket of strategic planning. It's just becoming very apparent to me that there are so many parallel processes that I would really like to see through. And so I have been essentially given the go-ahead on talking with city administration on moving forward with a leasing policy, which I think would be really beneficial not only to the harbor, but the entire city.
Thanks.
Commissioner Nelson.
I wholeheartedly agree I was one of the votes that said that the leasing policy ought to be a priority. I think the existing 1.5-page guidance that was done 30 years ago is woefully inadequate and I think misinterpreted. But that's the process. What the strategic plan are the activities that the leasing process would encourage or discourage, whether it be an ocean-dependent use, a visitor-serving use, or a related use. And if we wait for 18 months, that means we're not going to have one of the things that we had talked about on the work group was that we really wanted to talk intensely and directly with our stakeholders, with the public, to find out what their priorities are. Would they like to see us increase one category of use as opposed to another? To have a shiny, bright lease process, it will still confront, in my opinion, it will confront this body with a 30-year lease has expired, and do we do another 30 years? And it would be nice to be able to say, well, we did this for 30 years. Why don't we, since the constituents on Stearns Wharf or in the public said we'd like to see more of this or that, then we would say, maybe we'll do an RFP on this. If we wait till the end of an 18-month process, which, mark my words, will be 24 months, then for 24 months, we're not going to be taking actions on lease renewals that reflect what the community and the stakeholders wants, which is one of the driving aspects of our strategic plan. So I welcome and embrace the idea of going forward with improving the leasing policy, but that's more process than it is the content that we would want to, pursue, or topics or priorities that we would want to be pursue. So that's my concern. Good gosh. Don't eat Doritos in a public meeting.
All right. Commissioner Stedman, do you have a comment?
Yes, thank you, Chair. Vice Chair Ford, can you refer back to the report that you gave at the outset of this meeting where you mentioned 2 milestones? One was September 30th, and one was the public outreach?
Actually, there were 3, because we did say, we've always said that the next step was the public outreach, and we had hoped for May, and I believe when we talked about it, Director Wiltshire was fine with that. I know how things change, but the second thing was to extend the work group to September 30th in order to oversee the launch of the work on a strategic plan by the waterfront.
All right.
Thank you.
Great, thank you. Mr. Lopez, do we have any public comment on this item?
There are no hands raised in Zoom and no speaker slips submitted, Chair Stanwyck.
Great, thank you. Also, just a big thank you. I know this was a combined effort with the Strategic Planning Work Group. Shout out to Commissioner Nelson, Vice Chair Ford, and Commissioner Stedman for being on this. And also, in regards to this item, right now the recommendation is, as was read, is to kind of direct staff on the next steps, and also to establish a scope and time for this. And I believe we kind of wrapped up into one motion. But is there any other discussion on this item, or a motion would be in order at this time? Commissioner Anderson?
I guess my only thought, as more of a discussion point, is if it's important to the work group to kind of keep the title and the subject matter, then that's one thing for sure. But maybe if the leasing avenue is one that we know for sure we can make some headway on and some progress, maybe you keep the name and you say for the next 18 months or 24 months we're going to focus on the leasing aspect of it. Just a thought that I had that maybe ticks both boxes.
Mm-hmm.
Great, thanks, Commissioner Anderson. Any other comments from the commission? Oh, Commissioner Cohen?
So I assume we're looking for a motion here.
Yes.
and I think it should be led by someone from the strategic work group, since you have all worked on it. Can we go back to the staff recommendation really quick so we can look at that, though, and kind of talk this through?
Yes, that's a good point, Commissioner Cohen. Can we push the staff recommendation back up on the screen, please?
One, it was there. 1 second, go back. One,
There you
there we are.
Yep. Yep,
So
and
I'll say, for me, the first item, I'm pretty excited about the idea of looking at the leasing guidelines. And then holding off for the strategic planning, I don't know. I think that on the last two, I'd be looking for guidance from the strategic planning committee or work group, sorry, on that.
Yep, thank you. And just a reminder, the recommendation really, to summarize, is direct staff on next steps and a scope and time frame. So,
discuss these recommendations, but I'm going to vote against dissolving the current strategic planning work group. I think our work, I'm just saying, that's where I am. And the chair, Commissioner Ford, made the observation, we could consult with the city council and we could ask them, how would you feel about us starting a process, because we hate to stop. We're going to move on trying to improve the lease process, but we'd also like to improve, the planning process and the priority setting process for activities and uses at the harbor. That's where I am. I don't see the reason that we have to stop work and stop moving forward with a strategic planning process while both the sea level rise adaptation process goes forward as the city council goes forward. But we're appointed by the city council. And, if they felt strongly that we shouldn't, then I guess we shouldn't. But right now, as I sit here today, I'm for continuing the process for another year and determining whether or not we have to stop our planning process to allow the other two to continue. Right now, the city council is doing a planning process while the adaptation process is going on. And I don't know why we can't do the same thing while staff is working to improve the leasing policy. And I guess that's where I am.
great, thanks. Yeah, I think that's a good point, because it could be 18 to 24 months, as you said earlier, before any kind of formal policy gets passed. So that's a good point. Commissioner Cohen?
I just don't know if we need to make a motion here. Would it be then to extend the timeframe for this work group for, I don't know, Commissioner Ford had said at one point, had given us a date, and Commissioner Nelson has said 1 year. So I'm just looking for, I don't know if we need to make a resolution around extending it.
Commissioner Ford was basically presenting the consensus of the work group.
That's right.
So the time frame that she represented, I agree with.
Okay.
So-
Do we need to make a motion around that? Or I don't,
Yeah, this work group was formed with no specific timeline and no specific scope, so it would be really helpful to stay within the kind of guardrails and define a specific timeline and a specific task. So it is really Harbor Commission that needs to make the collective decision. So what a work group is you're essentially sending that work group off to go gather information and bring it back to you. So if you can define what that scope is and when it will terminate, that would be great.
Yep, and I think ultimately, would be helpful to the waterfront as well, just to have direction there as well. Yep, Vice Chair Ford?
So I'd like to try to make a motion, and that is to continue the strategic planning work group for 6 months, to work closely with the waterfront staff on the next steps regarding citywide leasing guidelines and the city council strategic planning process.
Great, thank you, Vice Chair Ford. We have a motion. Do we have a second?
No, a second.
I'll second it. Can I make a friendly amendment to add in the focus of, or to add in leasing guidelines as a component of, or is it already in there? I don't know.
Did I say that?
I'm
I
sorry.
think I said it.
You said that, I apologize.
No,
Okay,
no
then I'll
problem.
second.
Great, we have a motion by Vice Chair Ford. We have a second by Commissioner Cohen. Mr. Lopez, can you please read the recommendation?
Yes, this is a motion by Vice Chair Ford, seconded by Commissioner Cohen, to continue the strategic planning work group for 6 months, working closely with waterfront staff on next steps to the citywide leasing guidelines and the citywide strategic planning process.
Great, thank you. Vice Chair Ford.
If I could just clarify and ask Director Wilshire, is that enough of a goal in your mind?
That sounds perfect to me.
Okay.
Okay, and just to add to that, I mean, it doesn't address the point, though, about holding off until the 30-year waterfront adaptation planning process concludes, right? Right. None of us addressed that. So, but you asked the question directly to the director, and you're okay with our motion.
I am.
All right, thank you.
I'm fine with it, too.
Yeah, and I think a lot of, the city council strategic planning process will, I mean, in my opinion, it'll probably coincide with a lot of stuff that's going to be discussed in the work group as well, and, you know, the goals of the waterfront. Okay, we have a motion, we have a second. Mr. Lopez, can you please do a vote for us?
Yes, Commissioner Ford?
Aye.
Commissioner McCray is absent. Commissioner Nelson?
Aye.
Commissioner Stedman?
Aye?
Commissioner Anderson?
Yes.
Commissioner Cohen?
Yes.
And Chair Stanwyck.
Yes.
And that motion passes unanimously with Commissioner McCray absent.
Great, thank you. All right, we can move on to item number 5, the director's report. Director Wiltshire.
All right, commission members of the public, I should be quick on this one. Just a couple positive notes. Next slide. All right, so for those who've been to the harbor recently, you've seen our latest addition. So the Deepwater Diving Monument was installed on April 5th. This was 3 years in the making. Really great day. Huge crowd was present. So a number of commissioners, some city council members, a lot of folks from the diving community, donors, Maritime Museum. It was just a really fantastic project. The waterfront and city are hugely grateful to Deepwater Diving Committee, Maritime Museum, the artist Greg Politanovich, and all those involved. So at the outset, the Deepwater Diving Monument has been 100% gifted to the waterfront and the city. There was really no cost on the city's part. It was fully funded by donation from the diving community and the waterfront community. So really just an amazing piece of art. If you're into diving, if you're not, if you're from the waterfront community or not, come down and have a look at the craftsmanship. It really is just an excellent piece of public art. So another thank you to all those involved. Next slide. Speaking about council, so I wanted to take a minute with an update on some waterfront related items that are going in front of council and their various boards. So on April 22nd, City Council will be presented with the citywide draft budget. So this is essentially the kickoff of our budget process, and that after that date, it kind of frees up departments and boards and commissions to discuss our individual budgets. So a lot of budget stuff coming down the pipe, and on April 22nd, Council will be receiving the introductory budget. Additionally, on April 22nd, Council will be reviewing the Shoreline Cafe lease assignment that was approved by Harbor Commission last meeting, maybe 2 meetings ago. So that'll be in front of Council. On April 29th, the Finance Committee will be reviewing proposed fee changes for all city departments. So this will be after our budget meeting, and so we'll take those fees to the Finance Committee along with all other city departments. Also on April 29th, the Ordinance Committee will be reviewing the proposed vessel insurance policy that was approved by Harbor Commission last meeting as well. And on May 2nd, as I mentioned, City Council will be holding their all-day priority setting workshop from 9 to 5 p.m. in the Chase Palm Beach House. Next slide. Keeps on going. May 6th, City Council will review all city department budgets. And also on May 6th, City Council will review the vessel insurance policy that was approved by Harbor Commission. And June 3rd, that is the City Council's day to deliberate on all departments' budgets. And on June 17th is when the City Council is required to ultimately adopt the next two-year budget cycle for fiscal year 26 and 27. So a lot going on. Again, I believe I emailed all these dates out as well, but nice to kind of show them in a public setting too. So council, again, another part of the public process and a chance for anybody in the harbor or here to go speak and weigh in on those items. So thank you. That concludes my portion of the report.
Great, thanks, Director Wiltshire. Quick question on the vessel insurance, just because, we made that vote on it last meeting. The difference between the ordinance committee and the ordinance introduction, can you just describe what's going to be happening?
Yeah, the ordinance committee is a subset of council. It's essentially a subcommittee. There's 3 council members. They review and weigh in on anything that's ordinance related, so any municipal code updates. And so in this case, it'll be reviewed by that 3-person subset before going to council. And so that ordinance introduction is to the full council, so the full 7-member council. And the 3 members who sit on the ordinance committee will have already seen that information and have some background on it and provided their input as well.
Great, and also too, are the city attorneys going to be present on there? Are they going to be drafting like the muni language at the ordinance committee? Or does that happen at the city council meeting?
The ordinance committee will be very, very similar to our Harbor Commission meeting. So Waterfront will lead a PowerPoint presentation. The city attorney will be present. And so that same language will carry itself through the ordinance committee. If they have recommendations, we can make them at that time before going to full city council. And then it'll be in front of city council.
Great, thank you. Any questions on the director's report? Mr. Lopez, do we have any public comment on anything?
No, Chair Stanwyck. There are no hands raised.
Great, thank you. Okay. We can move on to item number 6, the businesses service report.
Mr. Chair, Commissioners, members of the public, again, my name is Cesar Barrios. I'm the Waterfront Business Manager. And as part of my business services report, I'm providing an updated timeline and calendar for the current 2-year budget cycle for fiscal year 26 and 27. Some of these points, Director Wiltshire just addressing his presentation, but I'm going to dive into a little more detail. So as shown on this table, the Waterfront Department and the city at large started the process back in November of 2024. This process is already well underway, as you can see in this table. We've already had 2 significant meetings where the department presented its budget to the city administrator. That was back in February 26. And then most recently on April 3rd, we discussed the waterfront fees and overall budget process with the Harbor Commission's budget work group down at the Waterfront Department. As shown in the timeline, this coming week on April 27, our finance department will introduce the citywide budget, including the waterfronts, to the whole city council. This is the time of the year or the meeting where the budget goes public. Then the very next day, on April 23rd, we, the Waterfront, will be presenting on a special Harbor Commission meeting an introduction and discussion of the waterfront budget with the full commission. And this is a public meeting, so that will take place at the Marine Center classroom, which is located in the Santa Barbara Harbor in the 125 building, and this meeting will take place from 4 p.m. to 6:30 p.m. Then the next important date here is April 29th, where the Finance Committee will discuss all of our fees citywide, but also they'll touch base on each department, any proposed adjustments, increases, reductions, and such. And from there, following any feedback received from the Finance Committee and the various boards and commissions that all city departments present to, the budget again will be presented to City Council on May 6th for a recommendation and following up with an approval at a later date that I'll speak here shortly. And that, and then we'll introduce the same budget, the same presentation to the Harbor Commission on May 15th for your recommendation to the council. Then on June 3rd, City Council will again convene for budget deliberations for a final citywide budget adoption on June 17th. So once the budget is adopted by the City Council, it takes effect on July 1st of this year, which is the beginning of fiscal year 26. I would like to note that all these meetings that you see up here on the screen are public, so I encourage the public to attend. Some of them will be available online, and then it's a great opportunity for the public to listen to what's coming up budget-wise with the city, not just the waterfront, but all city departments, and it's our intent to make this process as transparent as possible for all and be able to have public participation. And with that, I'll be happy to answer any questions. Thanks.
Thank you, Mr. Barrios. Do we have any questions from the commission? I think we just that one meeting that is April 23rd. What time do we have that scheduled for? Is it 4 o'clock p.m.?
It's from 4 o'clock to 6:30.
Great, and that's in the waterfront classroom?
Waterfront classroom,
Yep.
yeah, correct.
Great. Yeah, and just some clarity on that, really, just for the commission, it gives us 2 chances to review the budget before it goes to council. Just learning from experiences, about 2 years ago, we only did this one time at the May meeting. There's a lot of changes that were suggested, and then we had to go back and revise everything, and then we had to call a meeting right before we went to council. So this gives us the chance to look at the items before we have the main presentation in May. So if you guys do see anything in particular, definitely bring it to the attention at this meeting, then we can make changes and revisions. So I think that was a good process that we've learned from in the past. Any other questions? All right, thank you, Mr. Barrios. Okay, we'll move on to commission and staff communications. Do we have any staff communications?
Just one reminder, on May 3rd, we have Operation Clean Sweep. So it's a fun one down in the harbor. We send divers down in below Marina 1 again this year to kind of collect debris. So if anybody wants to volunteer, we're always looking for people to get dirty, come help people bring debris out of the harbor. So May 3rd from 8:30 to 12. You can reach out to me, reach out to our front desk if you're interested in volunteering and need more details.
Great, thanks. Any commission communications? Commissioner Nelson.
One is a thank you. As you know, we have a partnership that the Harbor Commission has endorsed to create an ocean collective, which will address critical infrastructure for the commercial fleet at Santa Barbara City College, but also to pursue a career path or a curriculum pipeline, if you will, for ocean careers. Yesterday, City College had a career day, gorgeous day overlooking the channel, and I want to thank the Waterfront Department. They were there because 6 of the 11 vendors or presenters who had tables were blue economy enterprises, and that included the Waterfront Department, and the Waterfront Department was there with Harbor Patrol. They had a boat there, so it really went well. Thank you very much for that. I'm sure the City College feels the same way. The second is, last month, I mentioned that there may be a possibility to slip in the ice house into a funding proposal. That didn't die in the last 30 days. There's going to be a meeting tomorrow to talk, it's a 6-county working group that we may again have an opportunity to put the ice house on the table. So I'm hoping that you might consider asking Brian Adair to pull up, if you have it's 70 words for a project that goes forward for funding consideration. And what we have represented is that this has been, reviewed, approved by the capital budget, approved by the city. We bid it out, but the cost of the bid was so high. But we're ready to go. So we may have in a couple of days just have to come up with 70 words or so that describe the project, the ice house project, because what they're trying to do is have a relationship between agriculture and facilities that are important to the agriculture, but also, so that's the working lands piece, but they want to have a working waterfront piece and its contribution to food systems. And the ice house obviously falls within that. It's been critical to the seafood industry since the 70s. So we'd like to think that if anything gets out of our 6-county area, maybe the ice house would be that. So that's all the only communication that I have.
Great, thanks, Commissioner Nelson. Commissioner Ford.
Thanks. I also just feel compelled to add something about the Deepwater Diving Monument. Really is a beautiful, beautiful piece of a sculpture, and I'm sure there'll come a time where we won't even be able to remember what it was like without it. And it's just important for me to mention Don Barthelmess, who is a former deep diver himself, a former professor at Santa Barbara City College, and a former board president of the Maritime Museum, who led this effort with a tremendous amount of blood, sweat, and tears, and it's really quite an accomplishment.
It really is.
Great, thanks. Yeah, it's pretty cool and a pretty good photograph with the background and everything. So. Awesome. And also, too, just wanted to add that the California Coastal Commission was here on April 9th through 11th in Santa Barbara. Myself, along with a handful of other commissioners here, members of the Waterfront attended that. Most of the issues that were discussed during this meeting were kind of beyond the scope of what we do, but nonetheless, they're pretty important issues and kind of neat just to hear the perspectives of the commission there. All right. Oh, Commissioner Stedman.
Yeah, I would just like to mention our appreciation, the commission's for the public's attendance tonight. And I would encourage you to speak with the other members of the public and invite them to attend our meetings. Thank you.
Yep, thank you. All right, with that, we move on to the final item, adjournment. Do we have a motion to adjourn?
Second.
A motion and a second. We'll do a voice vote. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? Any abstentions? Meeting adjourned. Thank you all.